Good afternoon, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Dr. Shay Bigsby, the Director of Graduate Writing Services here at the Graduate College. And I'm excited to be welcoming you to this webinar presentation about the thesis and dissertation submission process and formatting guidelines. So first, let me just go through what we'll be discussing in this session. We're going to talk first about the submission process for theses and dissertations. And along those lines, we're going to talk about deadlines, what the deadlines are, what they mean, and when they are going to fall for any given semester, whether it's this semester or going forward. We're going to talk about some of the key forms that need to be submitted as part of the thesis or dissertation submission process. And I'm also going to walk you through the ProQuest ETD system, the electronic theses and dissertation system, which is where your document will ultimately be published. Following that, I'm going to move into a discussion of the thesis and dissertation format. I'm going to talk about some of the resources we have available to you. I'll show you how to use our Word template, and I'll show you some tips, tricks, shortcuts that will make the Word template more effective. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the most common formatting issues. And then I'll certainly have time to go over any other issues you might have as well that you've come across. I just want to mention at the outset, everybody will be muted by default. If you'd like to send a question, you can use the chat option. You can send a message. And as I said, I'll try to answer questions as they come if I can, but if not, I'll at least allow time at the end to go through each question you might have. All right, so as many of you already know, but some may not, the key resource that I'm going to come back to time and time again, and indeed everything I talk about in this session can be found there, is our main thesis dissertation website. This is the exact URL, and you'll see I'm going to jump back and forth between the presentation and some other things. I'm going to show you a couple of ways to find the thesis dissertation page very quickly. Simple one, if you're using a search engine, if you type in NCAT thesis, it should be the first thing that comes up. If you're on the A&T website, you can also search in the search bar, type in thesis, it's the first thing that'll come up. Finally, if you're on the Graduate College's website, ncat.edu/TGC, you can find it right here under important links, thesis and dissertation information. All of those options will get you to this page. And this page is the kind of hub for all of our thesis and dissertation activity. I'm going to keep coming back to this page to pull up resources that I'm going to walk through with you. So my point will be, again and again, this is the place where you can find the information you need if it relates to the thesis or dissertation. The first thing that's of note, and I want to kind of go over, is how the deadlines work. So currently we only have the deadlines for fall 2019 up. We will post deadlines for spring and summer 2020 soon. For any given semester, and again, I'm kind of framing this such that it'll be useful whether you're at the very end or you're kind of in the middle of the process. I want you to kind of see how this all fits. But for any given semester, there are going to be three main deadlines that we post. An oral defense deadline, that is to say the final defense deadline, the date by which you have to defend the thesis dissertation for that semester. The submission deadline, which is, you might say it's really the critical deadline for any given semester. This is the deadline by which what we're going to call the submission packet or the submission email has to be sent to us. And then the third deadline for any given semester is going to be the signature page deadline. And as you can see, that's always going to be significantly later than those other two deadlines. The signature page deadline is really kind of to mark the close of the thesis dissertation submission process. So for anybody who's trying to figure out what they need to do and when they need to do it, that can really be in the back of your mind. That's lower priority. These two deadlines for any given semester are going to be the key ones. First, for fall 2019, the defense deadline is marked as Friday, the 25th of October. And then the submission deadline is Thursday, October 31st. Now, I'm going to go into more detail in a moment about what those mean. But let me just quickly show you some points about the deadlines. The first point I want to make about the deadlines is that you really should always refer to our thesis dissertation webpage to get the most accurate deadlines. And right now, as a case in point, because we have something we're trying to update on the academic calendar, but in the meantime, we are putting it on our website and I'm announcing it to students. So my point is, what we have on our website is what we at the Graduate College are following. So you can be sure that it's accurate and it's up to date. So please always refer to that webpage to get the deadlines for any given semester. Furthermore, I wanted to kind of just point out the general trend in when the deadlines are going to fall. So even for, next semester or into the summer or fall 2020 or beyond, you can more or less guess the dates by which these deadlines will be set for. And the key deadlines, which as I said are the defense deadline and then the submission deadline, are always going to fall in the fall semester in late October. In the spring semester, they're going to fall in late March. And then for the summer sessions, they fall either for summer session 1 in late May or in summer session 2 in early to mid-July. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. So even if we don't have deadlines posted yet for say summer 2020, if you pick summer session 1, those deadlines are probably going to fall right around the end of May. And if you pick summer session 2, 2020, the deadlines are going to end up falling right around the early to mid-July. So again, you can more or less, prepare yourself or plan accordingly. We'll post the exact deadlines, but that will give you the ballpark to kind of get yourself situated. Okay, so what I would like to do now is walk you through what the deadlines mean and what are the forms and submission steps that accompany those deadlines. And as I mentioned, I'm really going to use our website as the jumping off point because all the resources I'm going to show you are here on our website. You can pull them up now, or you can at least pull them up later after this session because you'll know where to find them. Right when you go onto the thesis dissertation webpage, you'll see there's a checklist for the submission process. And that's what I want to walk through to explain what happens related to these 3 deadlines. So again, the checklist for submission process. And you can make a copy of this, you can download it, print it out if you want to kind of keep track of your own progress. But this process will take place in any given semester. So it doesn't matter when you're graduating, this will be more or less the process. I've mentioned many of these points by email recently, especially for those of you who are planning to graduate in fall. But I definitely want to go through each of these steps in some detail and kind of explain them. So the first thing that comes up that's related to the thesis dissertation final submission process is what we call the report of the committee. So essentially this form is intended to, and I'll pull up a copy. Let's move this over. This form is intended to kind of formally announce to the Graduate College who's serving on your dissertation or your thesis committee. The form explains the policies, and I can talk more about that later if people have questions about who can be on the committees and how that works and graduate faculty status. But the point is, when you develop your committee, this form needs to be submitted to us to allow us to confirm the committee members, and for PhD students only, to assign what we call the graduate faculty representative. Okay, so this is what the form looks like. All of the committee members moving forward from today, this is the new form that we've developed. All committee members actually have to sign to indicate that they are going to serve on the committee. That's going to be a new piece from this point forward. Going back to our checklist, so we can kind of walk you through it and see where this falls in. You would ideally submit this as soon as the committee is established or as soon as you've decided the committee composition. So again, even if you're planning graduating next summer or even next fall, I would strongly recommend that you have this form submitted sooner rather than later. And I can see there's some comments, so I'll just pull those up as we go. Okay, gotcha. There was a question about the number of committee members. Can you add more than we have listed here? I'll follow up on that one offline. We can add kind of like an addendum. You could even have 2 forms and you could have them attached together and explain. I can follow up on that later. But normally the core committee for a dissertation committee would consist of at least 4 people, including the committee chair, and up to 5, including the committee chair. There could be cases where an additional person could be part of the core committee, but that's more unusual. So we can talk about that later. So you can follow up with me afterwards. And then again, in addition to those 4 or 5 core members, the graduate college will assign the graduate faculty representative. Okay, so if there were 4 dissertation committee members, with the addition of 1 person, there would now be 5. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. There's 4 or 5 usually as the core committee, and then we add the graduate faculty representative only for PhD students. And if you have a reason to have more than 5 core members, you can discuss that with us and we can allow that if it's appropriate. So again, just going back to the process, you definitely want to submit the thesis or dissertation committee composition form earlier rather than later. For people who are graduating in fall 2019, it really should be submitted already or ASAP. I know my colleague, the Assistant Dean, Ayanna Boyd-Williams, has been reaching out for any cases where we didn't already have the form. But that's for the current semester. You should certainly plan early. If you know your committee for the spring, or you know your committee for next summer, or even next fall, share that with us now. Get those signatures now and get that form to us so that we can confirm your committee. And again, this component is required for all theses and dissertations. Okay, now in any given semester in which you would want to graduate, you do have to apply for graduation. There's an application for graduation. You can go to our website for more information about this. I'm not going to spend any time on it, but essentially through Aggie Access Online, you apply for graduation formally. And that basically sends a message through the banner system that this particular student has applied for graduation for this particular semester, okay? And you do, it's important to note, you do have to be registered for at least 1 credit hour in that semester in order to apply for graduation. So for, say, a PhD student, you would need to sign up for at least the 1 credit continuation course to also apply for graduation. And the deadlines for that can always be found in the academic calendar for that given semester. Now, the third item I put on this list is kind of in a gray area because there's no specific deadline by which you have to do it. Normally, people are doing this in the semester in which they graduate. But crucially, you want to do it early in the semester in which you graduate. And this is the request for what we call the research clearance letter. Let me just give a little background and then I'll show you what it is and how it fits in. All graduate level research, all student research that's conducted at the university has to be cleared by the appropriate offices in the Division of Research and Economic Development, DORED. So DORED really has to clear your research, make sure all protocols have been followed, so on and so forth. Now, for some students, you actually need a kind of a pre-clearance before you even conduct your research. This is especially the case if you work with human subjects, if you work with animal subjects, or if you work with certain biological agents or biohazards, things like that. There are committees at the university that have to clear your research before you can conduct it. For students who are doing social science research or research in those fields, very likely you have human subjects involved in your research, and you have to get what we call IRB clearance. Those, as I'm saying, are forms of clearance you have to do before completing any research. Okay, so if you have any concern, you're not sure, does my research need to be pre-cleared, check with your advisor, follow up with offices in DORED. They can help you figure out if you need to do anything before you even conduct your research. That's one piece. For any student, though, who's doing a thesis or a dissertation, you do have to request what's called the final research clearance letter. Okay, so again, every student who's doing a thesis, every student who's doing a dissertation does have to request the final research clearance letter. And to do that, you go to the relevant webpage. Again, for those who might have just joined, I'm on our thesis dissertation page. I'm looking at the checklist, but this information is also explained in the text on that page, how to submit. Research clearance letter, same thing. So again, you can go there to find it, or you can look at this checklist to find the link. But essentially, the DORED has its own clearance process. So you have to go to this website. You can read what they say here about these other agents that might need pre-clearance, right, before any data is collected. But even if that doesn't apply to you, you still have to do this step. You have to go down, download a form, fill out the form, attach that form as well as your abstract and methodology, and then send that to the relevant email address. Now, here's the key point I want to make. They do say allow 3 business days for processing, but I would allow, much more than that. I would allow several weeks, ideally, a month or 2 would be optimal. Just because if all of the thesis students and all the dissertation students submit these forms right near the deadlines, they're going to be kind of overburdened, and they won't be able to get back to you in time. So you really need to submit this request. This is the request for the research clearance letter. You need to submit the request for the research clearance letter. I would argue early, at least early in the semester in which you intend to graduate. So for instance, if you're planning to graduate in fall, ideally you would have already done it, but you can certainly do it now, and I would not wait much longer. If you're going to graduate in spring, I would say wait until the start of the spring semester. If you have at least a draft of your abstract or methodology, and they accurately describe what it is you're doing or what you've done, you can send that to them very early in the semester. So in other words, what I'm saying is they don't need to see the final version necessarily of the document. They just need to see what your research entails, what kinds of materials you worked with, how you conducted the research. If they have questions, they will follow up and ask for more information. But again, you don't have to worry about it being perfectly finalized as long as it's accurate in describing your methodology and your research. Okay? So again, this is the step that we refer to as the research clearance letter. And allow at least I would allow at least a few weeks or even more just to make sure there's no issue with, you're waiting on the letter and the submission deadline is approaching. The reason I'm asking you to do this so early is because the research clearance letter, which is the item they're going to send to you to confirm that your research is cleared, the research clearance letter has to be included as part of the submission packet. Okay, so again, looking at the deadlines for fall, let's say the submission deadline is October 31st. So when the submission packet is going to be sent to us, it's going to include that research clearance letter. And you don't want to leave yourself, waiting until the last minute to receive the research clearance letter. You want to have it in your possession well in advance of the deadline so that you're ready to have your materials submitted on time. Okay, so that's why I say please submit the research clearance request early in the semester in which you plan to graduate. Okay, so now we get to the defense and the submission. So the defense would have to occur by whatever deadline is specified for that given semester. Again, For fall, it's going to be towards the end of October, so October 25th. So you'll need to make sure you schedule your defense, work with your committee members, including for PhD students, make sure you work with your graduate faculty representative to plan your oral defense within the defense deadline, on or before the defense deadline. Following the defense, we have an oral defense form that needs to be signed and completed and submitted to us electronically. And we follow up with departments on that as well, but I'm just letting you know as the student that that's what happens after the defense. There's an oral defense form where the committee members are going to sign off, as well as the department chair, and they're going to confirm that you passed the defense, or in the unusual case where you didn't pass the defense and you need to try again at a later time, they will inform us that the defense was not passed. But again, we ask that the oral defense form be signed and submitted to us, should be within 2 business days of after the defense occurring. And then we get to what I usually refer to as the critical deadline for any given semester. And that is the submission deadline, okay? So what has to happen on or before the submission deadline? Well, basically what has to happen is we have to receive what we would call the submission packet or the submission email. The submission email is sent by the thesis or dissertation major professor, the main advisor for the document. Your major professor will need to send to us 3 digital items as email attachments. And the 3 items are, first, a PDF copy of the thesis or dissertation. So in other words, now that you've made any changes based on your committee member recommendations, you've made every effort to format it correctly as best you could, you send the PDF copy of the thesis dissertation. That's the first item. The second item is the research clearance letter, which I mentioned earlier. So again, the reason you need to request that early is so that you have it ready with no concern, no ambiguity. You have it ready to be submitted here by the submission deadline. So the PDF copy of the document, research clearance letter from DORED, and then finally we have a separate document which is called the submission checklist. And it looks like, whoops, is that the wrong link? Let me pull it up this way. The submission checklist is signed by the major professor, by the department chair, and by you, the student. And this confirms that all of these things stated here have occurred. Okay, so just to summarize that again, my point is by the submission deadline, we need this email, the submission email to be sent to me by the major professor. It needs to include the copy of the document in PDF form, a copy of the research clearance letter from DORED, and the signed and scanned submission checklist. If those 3 things are sent to us on or before the submission deadline, you're in a good position. You're in the submission pool for that semester, okay? So that's the deadline I keep coming back to as critical, critical, critical. Make sure you get everything ready so that by the submission deadline, your major professor is ready to send us those documents. Now, realistically, you can help your advisor. You can help them by helping get these things together. You could even help get all these things together, send them the email with those 3 attachments, and then ask them to forward it to me, right? So you can actually get it all ready for them. If you have any concerns about making sure everything's in place, you can help send it to them and then just say, hey, forward this to Dr. Bigsby, and that's that. But in any case, it does need to come to us by the submission deadline. Once we receive the submission, and I do see a question that came through, and I'll address that in a moment. But once we receive the submission email or the submission packet, we will then be following up to explain the next steps from that point. So again, if your email is in, you're good, and you will then shortly get an email response from us explaining what the next steps are. So that is what you should expect around that time in whatever semester you're graduating Now somebody just asked, can the clearance letter, the research clearance letter be scanned? Yes, but it shouldn't really need to be. So the way that the research clearance letter comes to you, it's sent to you as a document electronically. So it can just be then forwarded to your advisor, who can forward it to me, so to speak, if that makes sense. In other words, the research clearance letter that comes from DORED is already a digital document, and then it can just be sent digitally forward to me. Okay, so looking back at our kind of step-by-step process, now you're at the point where everything's defended, you've made any content changes that your advisor and your committee required, and you've had it submitted to the graduate college. The next piece is going to lead to the final publication of the document. It's going to be uploaded into the ProQuest system, which I'll show you in a moment. Once it's in the ProQuest system, we review the document for formatting errors. We make a revision request to you, and we give you time to make those changes if required. You make any changes that are required, as you see here, and then you upload a revised final version of the document in ProQuest system. And the reason we do this within ProQuest system is because ultimately ProQuest is the system that publishes to a database. So your document will ultimately be published to a thesis and dissertation database. And so again, submission occurs, we have you upload to ProQuest, we review your ProQuest document, and then if needed, you make final changes per our request, our revision requirements. Now, you can see the final piece, the way we think of it, the final piece is the signed signature page. The signature page is the second page of the thesis or the dissertation. And again, later in this presentation, you'll see what I'm referring to, but you may well know what this is already. But it's a page in the document that has all committee members, as well as a place for the graduate dean to sign. And what you do is you have the correctly formatted version, a hard copy printed out and then signed by all committee members, as well as the department chair. And then it's submitted to the graduate college, the hard copy. We obtain the graduate dean's signature at the end of the semester, and we share the completely signed version back to the department for safekeeping. And that completes the thesis or dissertation process, okay? So that is the process in a nutshell. Again, all of those pieces are also described just right on our website in point by point. And I want to kind of drill down into them to kind of show you, you know, what they are and why they're significant. Now, the one piece I want to show you on the screen will be the ProQuest system and how that works and what it looks like. And at the current moment, I'm just going to mention a couple of things about it, and I'll have other sessions later that can really dive into more of the nuances of ProQuest. But I at least want you to get a sense of what it looks like, whether you're going to be graduating this semester or in a future semester. It'll at least give you a taste of what to expect. Essentially, you're going to be asked to go into ProQuest and create an account. So it'll look something like this. So I have an account, I have a student account to show you here as an example. You would first be, you know, the first time you log in, you would be creating an account, just like you create any other website. So create an account with a password, use an email address that you're going to make sure is reliable and that you'll use. And then if I didn't have one already in progress to show you, it would just say, do you need to create a new submission? You'd start new submission, submit new thesis or dissertation. And once you do that, it'll bring up a screen that'll look very much like this. And essentially on the left-hand side, ProQuest has all the steps, all the pieces you have to complete for them. And then when you get through all those steps, it'll check them off, and then you'll be able to submit it. And we at the graduate college will then be able to see the submitted document. I do see there was a question, and I'll come back to that shortly. Okay, so looking at the ProQuest system, I'm not going to dive into it in great detail. I'll be able to give more information about this in a separate kind of format, because it'll only really apply when you're ready to submit. But essentially what you're doing is you're giving some publishing options that are relevant to the database that is ultimately going to go into. There are different types of publishing. Some of them have a cost associated with them. Most students do the free version. But again, you can read, they have a lot of information. Once you get to ProQuest, you'll be able to see what I'm saying. They have a lot of information about why you might do one step versus the other, et cetera, et cetera. You do have the option, this is important, I want to mention, you do have the option of delaying the release of your document. So there are cases where the document is kind of tied up in publications, or in some cases there might be patent issues or sensitive material, and there might be a valid reason to delay the release, the full release of the document to ProQuest. Because essentially once it's in ProQuest, anybody with anybody with a library account or a university library account anywhere in the world could find your document, and they would be able to read the full document. So if there's some sensitive material, you might decide it's appropriate to delay the release by 6 months or a year, or in some cases 2 years, but really that should be justified before it can be permitted. But again, that option does exist. Sometimes faculty are asking about this because the nature of the research is tied to their research or their lab's research. Please discuss this with your faculty members. Decide if there's a reason to delay the work for any reason, and then a request can be put in to make a delay. I will mention, it talks about the ProQuest options, but there's also IR. IR is the institutional repository. The institutional repository is basically the library's, the library maintains copies of the thesis and dissertation as well. So for instance, if you want to delay the release to ProQuest by 6 months, a year, 2 years, you would also want to delay the release to the institutional repository. And again, I can say more about that in detail for anybody who's curious, but that's the gist of it. Most of these steps are fairly straightforward. You put in your detailed contact information, you put in detailed information about the document, you put the full title as you want it to be published, you put a copy of the abstract, you put the year of completion, et cetera, et cetera. They also have information about subject categories. And for subject categories, these are just general kind of library and database tracking categories. And so the idea is if you put in relevant categories, somebody could search for that category and they might come across your document. So you can use this as you see fit, but the idea is to kind of, as accurately as possible, describe what categories your document best fits into. In addition to the categories, you can add just keywords. So if you know that, let's say you're working in biology and you're working on something related to DNA, you could just put DNA as a keyword, and then somebody could search by keyword and your document could come up. So these are just helpful tools to allow the ProQuest search engine to find your document, essentially. You also put information about your committee members and so on. Under the PDF section, you will actually upload the, the correct version of your document. And then you also, if you're asked to make changes once it's in ProQuest, you will go back into your existing ProQuest account, you go to the PDF page, and you will revise the PDF file. So again, that's really where the document itself is stored. Finally, ProQuest will give you options that are paid options. They're not required, but they're up to you. They'll give you options about copyright, and copyright is not required. Well, I'm sorry, it's not even that you're applying for copyright, you're applying to register for US copyright. Now, ProQuest explains why you might want to do this. Essentially, the gist of it is that if there were some legal issue around your thesis or dissertation in the future, it would be ideal if you had previously registered for copyright. Does that happen very often? No, it almost never happens. I mean, I don't think there have been cases that we're aware of where a real legal issue has come up around any student's document. But again, if there were some kind of legal issue and you needed to take something to court over your document, if you had registered, you would be in a better position. Your document does, however, even just by virtue of being published, carry copyright privileges. And again, I don't want to get into all the legal nuances. I'm not sure I'm the best person to explain all of them. But you can read more about that here and other places if you're curious. The gist of it is, if you want them to do this, to actually file for copyright, there is a cost of $55 associated with that. You can do this yourself. You can actually directly register for copyright at the Library of Congress, and it's a little cheaper than that. Maybe it's $20 cheaper. So essentially, ProQuest is saying if you charge, they'll charge you a little bit extra to complete this step for you, if you're interested in that step. It's certainly not required. The document is still copyrighted just by virtue of being published. And certainly the Graduate College does not require you or make any stipulation about whether you should or should not register for copyright. So that's a decision you can make. Similarly, you can order copies. So you can order hardbound copies. They're quite expensive, as you can see here. So just one hardbound copy is $62. If you buy 3 or more copies, it's slightly cheaper per copy, but it's still fairly expensive. There's no requirement to purchase copies on our account, but you can discuss this with your faculty members if there's any requirement on their end, or if they expect copies to be purchased. That's between you and them, as well as the payment. Those are issues you'd have to discuss with them. What I will mention, and it's an important point, I'll mention one thing, which is they will not send you the printed copy if you do order copies. They will not send you a printed copy until after the document is published in ProQuest. Now, what that means is you'll have to wait, and it won't occur until after you've graduated. Okay, so for instance, let's say you finished the thesis or dissertation in November and you ordered copies. Well, we actually cannot send ProQuest the final version of your document until your degree is cleared. So let's say your degree is cleared in December. Well, we have to wait until December. We have to wait for that degree to be cleared. Then we send it to ProQuest. Now ProQuest, starting in December, will be able to process your account and start to work on your order. So my point is, you might not actually get the order until several weeks or even months after graduation. And it's important partly because if you put a current address, like your living address in Greensboro, but you're going to be moving right after you graduate, you would need to then follow up with ProQuest to make sure they send it to your new address if you've moved. But again, they're not actually going to print and publish, excuse me, they're not going to print and send you anything until after you've graduated. So keep that in mind, just letting you know. If you've made any of these paid options, you do have to pay for the order right then. I believe you have to use credit cards, so you have to pay the credit card right then as you submit. And then once you go through and complete all these steps, it'll allow you to click submit, and it's submitted. Once the document is submitted, we at the Graduate College have access to it, and then we can go into your account, view the PDF document. We will then make a revision request through the ProQuest system, and you would also make changes in the ProQuest system as needed. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's the ProQuest system. I have other video tutorials, and I can go into more detail. For those who are really about to submit, I can really kind of dive into more details, but I just wanted to at least give you a quick overview and show you some of those decisions that have to be made as you go through that process. Okay, so going back to the deadlines and kind of, again, visualizing how all this fits in within the space of a semester by, again, let's take fall, and you can, more or less speculate how this would play out the same way in the spring or in the summer. By the end of October, the document has been submitted. In early November, basically what's happening is the student is uploading the document to ProQuest. The Graduate College is reviewing it in ProQuest. We're making revision requests as appropriate. In early to mid-November, then you as the student are now making any changes in terms of format that we require. You're going to go back into ProQuest, upload your revised final version of the document. And then for fall, in late November, you would need to submit the final version of the signed signature page. There are 2 reasons why we have the signature page due later than the other pieces. The first reason is we need to verify the format of the signature page before you have it printed and signed, because there can be errors. You might accidentally have an older version that has the wrong name, or it might have the wrong language somewhere on it. So basically my point is you want the graduate college to either confirm the format or have you help you correct the format of the signature page before you submit it. So that's one reason it's later than the other steps. The other reason is the signature page is considered to be kind of the closing piece of the process. So in other words, the signature page is now signed off to confirm that everything's been done at the department level. And then it's also going to be signed at the graduate college level by the graduate dean to confirm that on all sides, your document is complete and approved and finalized. So again, for the fall, in late November, that is due. In spring, it would fall roughly, towards the end of April. That's more or less ballpark. So the signature page would be due towards the end of April. It's basically about 3 to 4 weeks after the submission deadline. That's more or less the metric there. Okay, so that is the summary I wanted to provide of the submission process. Now you will be provided with, once it's available, a copy of this presentation if you need to go back over some of these steps. You can also refer to the checklist that I showed you earlier with the submission process, which walks you through all those steps. Now I'm aware that there are a lot of steps here. I know it feels kind of draining to go through all these different pieces where you have to have something signed or you have to send this to one office or another. But please understand that all these steps are essential and they all play an important role in building towards the overall completion of the document. Making sure all these safeguards are in place is, well, frankly, it's required in terms of university policy and in terms of our governing agencies' policies. And it ensures that everything is done in an appropriate fashion and that there's nothing unusual or nothing that causes concern or question. Okay. Now, I'm going to turn now to the formatting in more detail. So if anybody does have questions about anything I've said thus far, some people have been typing already, but please feel free to type in a comment in the chat box if you have any further questions. And I'll transition now to the next piece. Let's see, just making sure there's no comments. Okay, so when we talk about the format for your document, there are a number of specific requirements. They are outlined again on our page, and I'll show you a couple of places where you can find them. If you're on our thesis dissertation page, we do have a checklist of formatting guidelines, which you can kind of use to double check yourself. You can go through all these pieces, make sure you've met all these requirements. Also, if you scroll down on our main thesis dissertation page under resources, you're going to find what are really the key resources related to formatting. We have a formatting handbook. The handbook really just explains all of the formatting requirements. But by far the most useful and the most important resource we have is our template. The bottom line is very simple. If you use our template, and specifically I'm referring to the one that we have in Microsoft Word, if you use our Microsoft Word template, you will make your life much easier when it comes to formatting your document. The template already contains all the requirements that we have, and it has a lot of shortcuts to do things that you would otherwise have to do manually that would be much more painstaking and time consuming. So if you use our template, you will save yourself time and you will simplify the process. Now, there is a template that we have that's been designed a couple years back, actually maybe a few years now, by a student in engineering in the LaTeX system or LaTeX. If you don't know what LaTeX is, this is not for you. So just ignore it completely. If you do know what LaTeX is and you want to use it, you might find this template to provide some useful starting points. However, the graduate college cannot provide technical support. At the end of the day, what matters is that the produced document is formatted correctly. So if you're struggling to create it in LaTeX, it may be worth your while to switch to the Word document and import much of your material into Word. And I'll speak to that as I talk about the Word template now, some ways you can kind of help simplify the process. I see there was a question. I'll come back to that at the end. I'll kind of address those kinds of questions at the end. As I go through the format, please do ask questions as we go, and I'll try to explain questions that are relevant to format in process. But again, if anything's missed, I'll come back to it at the end as far as questions. So again, my point was make sure you use the template. Now, as you'll see, there are two different versions of the Word template. They're almost exactly the same, but with one small difference. And I'll show you what that difference is now so you can see, you know, whether it's relevant to you. Okay, now I'm going to open up the Word template. And everything I'm going to show you right now is going to be in the Word template. So you can kind of see how it works. Now, even if you're going to end up using LaTeX or LaTeX, this will be helpful because you can visually see what the document should look like. So the Word template is still useful to you in that case. So the first thing is the preliminary pages, the first several pages are already formatted correctly for you. All you have to do is fill in your information. Wherever you see square brackets, replace it with your information. The title, your name. If you see a square bracket, it needs to be removed and replaced. So here you would put one or the other type, whichever type. A thesis submitted to the graduate faculty or a dissertation submitted. Where you see the degree title, you just put, if you're a master's student, you would put Master of Science. And that's it, right? So anywhere you see square brackets in the first few pages, replace them with the relevant text. And then, of course, delete this note if you're using the Word template. This is the signature page that I mentioned. This is the document that has to be signed by all committee members. And then once it's submitted, it also has to be signed by the graduate dean. Obviously, again, fill out wherever you see square brackets, replace them. Importantly, you may have more or you may have fewer committee members than we have listed here. If you're a master's student, for instance, you probably have less committee members than we have spaces for here. All that matters is you do have to have a space for your major professor, you have to have a space for any other committee members, and you do have to have a space for your department chair. You also have to have a space for the dean of the graduate college. Currently, Dr. Gloucester is the interim dean, so he should be listed exactly as you see here. Now, if you need to, you can do a couple of things. One is you can just kind of click around and find the boxes here, and then you can delete them. And then if you want to, for example, you could click and then move this box over. So you can play around with the format here to make sure things line up evenly. But if you're not sure about that, if you're uncomfortable moving those things around, on our resources page, we also have sample signature pages of different sizes. So for instance, if you only have 4 total, including the dean, or you have 5, whatever it is, you can just look at that. It's an individual document with just that page, and then you could copy and paste it to replace this version of the page. So again, you can look at those for reference if you want to see what I mean. But the point is, you don't need to leave extra spaces. Obviously, you don't need extra spaces, so you can remove or you can replace any spaces that are not required. Now, just a couple quick points. These are very minor, but they come up. In some cases, students have a co-advisor or a co-major professor. If appropriate, you could have 2 people listed. So you could put, you know, co-major professor here, and then you could have another co-major professor here on the right, and you list both their names, Dr. So-and-so are both co-major professors. That's fine, if it's appropriate. Also, there are cases where the department chair is also a committee member. So you could type in one entry, you could have department chair and committee member. That's fine. As long as all committee members are represented, as long as the major professor, the department chair, and the graduate dean are represented, that's fine. And again, you can look to our website for examples of different configurations for this page. The copyright page is also required. Now the copyright page, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about ProQuest. The copyright page, just by virtue of having this page and by having it published to ProQuest, your document does carry basic copyright privileges. So that's why I mentioned, even if you don't do that extra paid option, your document does carry copyright privileges with it. And there are a lot of legal issues around that. I'm not going to get into that. And again, you'd probably really have to consult with a lawyer to explain exactly what it means. But again, the copyright page is part of the document. You'll have a biographical sketch. This is written in the third person. So you put your name first and you write about yourself in the third person. So I would say, you know, Shay Bigsby, ... whatever I'm going to say. You can be as specific or as general as you want with your biographical sketch. You can just speak to your academic background. You know, Shay Bigsby received an undergraduate degree from X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can give more personal background if you wish. You can tell where you're born or what have you. That's a personal choice. But it is written in the third person. You don't put I, you put your name, and then you put he or she, et cetera, for the biographical sketch. The dedication acknowledgements pages are optional. They're usually included, or at least one of them is. And usually it's a place to acknowledge whether it's dedicated to family members on the dedication page. And the acknowledgements page, you acknowledge kind of the committee, the people who've helped you move through the process. I do see as we're going here, this is relevant. Somebody asked, can you include photos in the biographical page? Yes, I think that would be okay. I'm trying to think. Be careful and be smart about it. But yeah, you can have a picture. Let's say I wouldn't have you wouldn't have a photo collage. You wouldn't have multiple pictures. You could have a picture of yourself or yourself receiving a degree or something, if you like, or some kind of professional shot, whatever, whatever you feel is appropriate. Again, you can't have multiple pictures. You can't have a collage, but you could have a photo accompanying your biographical sketch. That could work. Not required by any means. And I would say, you know, it's almost never done, so it's very unusual, but it could be appropriate in certain cases. I'll mention this at the outset, actually, because it's it might come up with other questions people might have. When it comes to formatting, I'm going to show you our format. I'm going to show you a couple places where there are variations, where there are options you might have. The bottom line when it comes to format is there's some strict requirements, but there are other things where consistency is the main point. So in other words, there might be 2 or 3 different ways you could format it, but you want to make sure every time that case comes up, you format it the same way within your document. And this will apply to headings, will apply to captions for figures and tables. It'll apply to some other things I'll show you. So again, you might have options, but you do need to be internally consistent within the document. And that turns out to often be very important. So we might notice, well, here in chapter 1, you did it this way, but in chapter 2, you did it this other way. Pick one and apply it consistently. And a lot of these are they're very minor in a sense, they're very nitpicky, but it is important by the end of the document's processing that it be formatted consistently and cleanly, as well as within the requirements of the graduate college. Okay, so I'll make that point at the outset. When we come to the table of contents, as well as the list of figures and list of tables, this gets to one of the most useful elements of the template. So if you're using our Word template, you can see if you click on the table of contents, or if you similarly click on the list of tables or list of figures, it brings up this kind of shading. So you can tell that Microsoft Word is what you can call, it's treating this section as a field that can be updated. And basically what that means is, if we do things right, you can automatically update the field. So you can see if I right click in this version of Word, every version of Word will have some variation of what I'm showing you. So even if you have a Mac version, you have an older version of Word, they all have the functions I'm showing you. You might have to look up what they look like in case they don't show up in the same way, but they will all the functions I'm about to show you will be in any version of Word that's later than 1999. So again, if you're in the table of contents, you right click, you can see you can update the field. And we're going to come back to that in a moment, and you'll see how useful it is, because what it's going to mean is if you do things right within the document, all you then have to do is come back here and update the field, and it'll automatically update the sections, the subheadings, as well as the page numbers. So it's going to be extremely useful to you to have this tool at your disposal. And again, I'll show you that in detail in just a moment. One thing I want to point out right now as I start getting into the details, the nuances of the template, I would recommend this as the best way to use the template. If you're somebody who likes to, have a separate document for every chapter as you're writing, like let's say, okay, you have a separate file for chapter 1, a separate file for chapter 2, etc. As you're writing them, that's fine, you can do that. What I would recommend is that when you're ready to actually start formatting the whole document correctly, I would download a fresh copy of our template, just go to our website, download the template, and then copy and paste your document, your content from the other document into the template. Okay, so again, my point is, if it were me, I would strongly recommend you bring your content into our template, as opposed to simply copying and pasting the first 10 pages of the template and pasting them into a new document. Okay, because that will automatically bring with it some challenges that you could have circumvented by doing it the other way. So it's like, you can fix it if you do it that way, but it'll be more time consuming. So it's much better for you to take material that you have elsewhere and paste it into the template, okay? And then just rename the template and say, now this is your working draft or whatever, okay? So that's one thing I would really emphasize right at the outset. So like, for instance, we have sample text in here for chapter 1. What I would do is I would just highlight just the main text for our sample chapter 1. And you could either paste your text right in, or you could delete this and then copy and paste your text in right here at the beginning, however you want to do it. But again, it'll be in your best interest to bring your text here rather than the other way around, okay? Now I'll just use the sample text so I can show you some examples of what you could do with a template. But again, let's say you've brought in some text. Now, to show you what I was just talking about with the table of contents, let's do an example. Let's say you're developing headings. Okay, we have some sample headings. Let's say you want to add a new heading. So we already have headings. Now you'll notice the numbering scheme for the headings. This is just a standard numbering scheme. In some disciplines, you may not want to use numbering. You don't have to. You could just have, a heading. Let's say we want to use numbering. So let's say, okay, we have section 1.1. Then you have section 1.2. Under section 1.2, you have a subsection, which will be numbered 1.2.1. Right, so take note of that numbering system. All the sections that have 2 digits or 2 numbers separated by period are what we call level 2 headings. So all level 2 headings would be, let me just quickly show you, it'd be like, 1.1, then 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, etc. These are all level 2 headings. If you have a subheading under one of those, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, those would be level 3 headings, et cetera, et cetera. So then you could have a subheading even further. It'd be 1.1.2.1, excuse me, 1.1.2.1, that's a level 4 heading, et cetera. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about levels of headings. The chapter headings are already considered the level 2 headings. Excuse me, the level 1 headings. So chapter headings are level 1 headings. These would then be subsections, level 2 headings. These would be level 3 headings. This would be a level 4 heading. Okay. So as I talk about the levels, that's what I'm referencing. So when you can see in the text, we actually have them labeled as such: sample level 2 heading, another sample level 2 heading, level 3 heading, etc. Let's say I want to add another level 2 heading. So this chapter already has, it goes to section 1.3. Let's say I want to type in 1.4, and I'm going to call it a new subsection. Now, here's the trick that makes everything a lot simpler. There are 2 ways to do it. I'll show you this way and I'll show you the other way. The first thing you can do is use, this is the simple way I usually show people, use the styles in Microsoft Word. And again, it might look different in older versions of Word, but there always are, there's a place in Word where there's styles stored. You can actually see I was doing something right there as I highlight something. Basically, the gist of it is if you highlight text and you choose a style, It'll be formatted a certain way. You can look at the subsections changing based on which style I'm going to choose. So if you choose a style, it'll be formatted a certain way visually. So it'll be bold, or it'll be bold in italics or whatever. But it will also notify Microsoft Word what this is within the scheme of your document. And I'll show you why that's relevant. So for instance, this is a new level 2 subheading. So what I want to do is I want to just highlight the text and click heading 2. Heading 2 style just means we're telling Microsoft Word it's a level 2 heading. Now you can see it automatically made it bold as well. That's great. Let's say, okay, I start a paragraph. Paragraph starts here, etc. I'm not going to type anymore. Okay, so you have a new subsection. Now here's the useful part. If you go back up to the table of contents, and as I was saying, you can right click on it and you can see there's an update field option, or there's a shortcut. If you click anywhere on the table of contents and then you push, the default is F9, so try it, F9 on a keyboard, it automatically does this as well. It brings up the update field. So we can either right click and do update field, or you can just click somewhere and do F9. And if I right click and do update field, it brings up this little dialog. It says update table of contents. You can either update the page numbers only, or you could update the entire table. In this case, let's see what happens if I update the entire table. There you have it. By default, it now knows that there was a new subsection added. It also knows that it was a level 2 subsection, by which I mean it lines up with the other level 2 subsections. And it automatically gave you the page number. So this is extremely useful because you are required to have a table of contents, and you are required to include all subsections, and you are required to accurately list the page numbers. You could do all that manually. That's fine. You could do that if you want, but it'll probably for most people be much easier to do what I just did, which is create the in-text sections appropriately, and then just update the table of contents, and it'll pull in the relevant information. Now again, it might look different in yours, but in mine, if I push Control and then click, it jumps me to a given section. So for instance, you can use this to jump around. You say, well, I need to go back to section 1.4, Control and click. It jumps me right to it. And that's where we have our new subsection. That's really the gist of it when it comes to adding a new section. Now there's another way you could do it if you wanted to. You could take our existing template, or you could basically take any section that's already in the correct style. You could copy and paste it. So again, I'm just going to cut this paragraph and show you what I mean. Like, let's say I just want to add a new heading right here. I can just paste it. Now, of course, it's going to have the same text, but you could then, modify it yourself. Now, already just by copying and pasting it and modifying the text, Microsoft Word already knows it's a level 2 heading. So similarly, if I go back up to the table of contents, now the numbering is not going to be correct, because this numbering here is done manually, the section number that is. So these section numbers are manual. So you can see that created a discrepancy, but it did automatically update that it automatically added that section in the table of contents. So my point is, you can either type some text and then you just highlight it and click the appropriate heading type, or you can copy and paste an existing heading of the correct type, mind you, and then replace the text. Now, a couple of things I just want to show you that could come up. So you could see here, the level 2 headings, they have a specific format. They're left aligned, they're against the left margin, they're in bold. They also use, I'll note just for future reference, they use what we call title case capitalization. That's where all of the, you could say all the major words, all the words except for small linking words, the first letter is capitalized. So capital S, capital L, capital T, capital H. But if you had the words and, a, or, of, those words would not need the first letter to be capitalized. So you can look this up online if you just want a quick reference, but title case capitalization is what it's called. And that's as opposed to sentence case. So in a normal sentence in English, you don't capitalize most of the words. You only capitalize the first letter of the first word, and you capitalize any proper nouns appropriately. But this would be an example of sentence case capitalization, whereas this is an example of title case. What I was going to say though is you can see here, we have a format for level 2 headings. We have a different format for level 3 headings. And indeed, there's an even different level 4 and level 5 heading style. So each heading style has its own format, is my point. The template shows you examples of all of them. Our handbook also shows you examples of all of them. But there's something interesting that happens with these higher level higher level headings. In our standard format, which we show here, which is based on APA format, in our standard format for level 3, level 4, and level 5 headings, you'll see right here where I'm highlighting, the heading is on the same line as the paragraph start. So in other words, the paragraph starts right after the heading. And you'll also notice the heading, the heading is indented. The heading is indented just like the first line of a new paragraph. And then the paragraph under this heading starts in the same line. Let me show you quickly how you would do this if you wanted to do it manually. So again, let's say I'm going to create a new level 3 heading. And for consistency, we're going to make sure they all have the same style. So let's say all level 3 headings are sentence case capitalization. And then you're also going to have a paragraph that starts here, et cetera, et cetera. So similarly to what we did before, you highlight and you click the appropriate heading type. So here it's level 3 heading. Now, what I want you to notice is you don't want to accidentally highlight the entire paragraph and then do level 3 heading, because then if you update the table of contents, the entire paragraph is going to show up in your table of contents. And that's not what you want, obviously. So what I would say is start typing the entire paragraph and then just be careful to only highlight the heading itself, not any part of the paragraph. So now I have just the heading designated as level 3. And I can just push tab. By default on mine, I have tab set to, this would be 0.5 inches. You can see that with this little ruler. That's usually kind of preferred, to have 0.5 inch indentation, 0.5 inch indentation for the first line of a given paragraph or for any higher level heading, okay? And again, now that I've identified the heading type, it will automatically come up in the table of contents when I update the table of contents. Okay, so that's that. Now I do see there was one new question about the headings. Are pronouns capitalized? Pronouns are capitalized. Usually pronouns would be what, like, you know, he, she, they. Prepositions are not always capitalized. The simple rule of thumb is that you could say small linking words are not capitalized. So the word a, the word the word and. Now, if you want to be a little more technical, yes, there are other slightly longer words that are not capitalized. Technically, you probably would not need to capitalize from, etc. You can look online. There's some rules about this, about which words need to be capitalized and which don't. But the simple ones that come up all the time are ones like a, the, and, those small linking words. For simple reference, those are the ones that do not need to be capitalized even in title case capitalization. And I might actually, if we have time, I might pull this up later. I can show you some examples. Yeah, and I see there was a question, and I'm gonna kind of mention this now again. I said this, but if you were to, here's an example actually, I'll just do it by accident, so to speak. If you go into the table of contents, you update the field, and something that's wrong comes in. So like right here, part of this paragraph that I was just typing showed up here. So if you see that, or it might be bigger, it might be a huge chunk of text that's from the document. Basically what it tells you is Microsoft Word thinks that that is part of that style. So for instance, here, now I know, oh, okay, Microsoft Word thinks this is in heading 3 style. If I go back to that section, there are a couple ways you might be able to fix it. You might be able to do this. You can highlight just that text and you click normal, and it should undo the heading style. So now you can see if you click over different sections. So this is still a heading, but this is not. Worst case, you can highlight the whole paragraph and you can make it normal. And then you can just try again. Okay, let me just highlight this and just make this heading 3. And then so on and so forth. So yes, it can come up that something unexpected pops up in your table of contents or in your list of figures or list of tables. And it basically means Microsoft Word has incorrectly, well, or rather you've incorrectly identified, or maybe you clicked something, you copied something, and Microsoft Word thinks the rest of the paragraph is part of the heading. So you can just go to that exact section because it'll tell you exactly what section it is, and you can figure out what the problem is there. Okay, so that's basically it in a nutshell for headings. So, look at our examples for how to format them, but as far as how to update your table of contents, that was really it. Maybe I'll show you this really quickly from our handbook. I just want to show you a visual of all the different heading types in one place. Yeah, just so you can see what they look like. This doesn't have quite what I wanted. Well, that's fine. It describes them here, but that's not quite what I was looking for. You can go through the template and you can see examples of the different heading types. The point is the higher levels, like here's an example, level 4 heading is also italicized, et cetera, et cetera. So they each have a different format. Now, one big picture thing as far as headings are concerned, in thinking about your headings, be thoughtful in the way that you lay out your different heading types. So for instance, a level 3 heading like this, like here's an example. Here's a level 2 heading, and then here are some level 3 headings under it. The level 2 heading implies that it's a higher level, and then these are subsections under that section. So you only need these level 3 headings if they're going to serve as subsections under a level 2 heading. My point being, you don't need to include like level 4 headings or level 5 headings unless they fit and are appropriate. And you may, in some cases, not even need level 3 headings. It might be that you really just have a bunch of subsections within one chapter. So just be thoughtful about how you lay out your subsections. Only include them if they really are subsections under the previous heading type, okay? That's one other note about that. Now, I want to show you some things about figure and table captions. So when it comes to figure and table captions, you might think, well, it's probably going to be the same exact thing we did with headings. Well, it's close, but it's really not the same thing. So please note this. It's a different process than identifying the headings. So just like, we identify the headings with the styles. For the captions, don't do it that way. There is a style that says caption, but it will not get you what you need. So don't do it. So instead, do it this way. Let's say you have a figure or a table you want to caption. Now, first off, you can insert an image very easily. You can copy and paste it from a different document, or you can do insert in Word's options. You go to the insert option. You can go to pictures and find the document if you have it saved, find that image, and then insert it that way. My point is, one way or another, you brought an image into the document. Once you have an image, what you need to do is you need to create a caption. So to create a caption, you can do it a couple of different ways. One way is under the References tab. Under References, there's a spot for Insert Caption. Okay, so just click right under the figure, go to References, Insert Caption. It'll bring up this little dialog. It'll say, what type of figure, or what type of thing is it? So you can say, well, it's a figure, or you could change it if it's a table. You can use this for equations as well. Honestly, we don't, and this is a question that comes up sometimes in science fields, we don't require that you have a list of equations. That's not a thing you have to have, like a separate list of equations at the beginning of the document. But you may want to have labeling for each of the equations as you go. So you could use this method to do it. You could insert a caption under the References tab, and then choose Equation. Or you can do it manually, which I can show you later if people want to see that. But again, you choose which types. Let's say it's a figure. Okay, it's a figure. I'm going to insert my figure. Okay. Now, there are a couple of nice things about the figure captions. One is it'll automatically put the figure, and you can see the number if you hover over it. In some versions of Word, if you hover over it or if you put your cursor over it, you can tell it's a field because it kind of grays it out. It kind of highlights it. Basically, that tells you Word is tracking it. That's really the gist of it. Word is tracking this figure. You'll also notice if you, let's say you have another, let's say you put two in right out, one after the other. You want to add another caption. I'm just going to do the same thing. References, insert caption. It's another figure. Okay. If you insert captions this way, you also notice it automatically numbers them and updates the subsequent numbers for you, which is really nice. So if you have to actually go back and insert a new figure between some existing figures, it automatically updates the figure numbers for you if you do it this way. Okay. Now, for our style, the style we tend to recommend looks like this. It's italicized for the figure number, and then it's non-italicized for the caption. So here's some sample caption text. And that's really it. Now, this is a case where you could do it differently. You could do italics and bold if you want or something. I mean, that's fine as long as it's consistent. We're not going to be too strict about that. But this is the style that we show in our handbook, in our guidelines. So this is what I'm going to show you right now. Now, if you go up to the list of figures, just like with the table of contents, if you right-click, update field, it'll ask you the same thing. Do you want to update the page numbers or the entire table? Let's do entire table. Click OK, and bam, it added these new captions. Now you can see figure 1, I didn't actually type in a caption, so it didn't see it. It didn't have anything to put there, but normally you'd put a caption there, obviously, and then you'd update it. That's basically it for figure captions. Now, when it comes to table captions, it's very similar, but there's one or two small tweaks. So I want to show you a couple examples. When it comes to table captions, again, there are a couple ways you could do it. You could even have a table as an image if you want to. Like, for example, if you're using a different data management or data analysis system, it might produce its own tables, and you could just copy and paste an image, or you could create a new table within Word. You can go to Insert Table, choose how big you want it to be, start typing in your headings, etc. You can style them if you want. That's all fine. That's up to you, as long as you're consistent and it's logical and makes sense. But again, let's say you have a table. Now, the first point that I want to make with table captions is that table captions go above the table. So figure captions are always going to go below the figure, but table captions are going to go above the table. And I see somebody in the comments asked a question about chapter-based numbering, and I will get to that in a moment because that's an important point that I will have to make. But I'll come to that in a moment. But again, to talk about table captions, first let me show you this and I'll show you that. Same concept, you go to References, you insert a caption. Now here, instead of a figure label, you're going to choose a table label. Very simple. It's automatically going to tell you what your number is. You'll click OK. Great. Now, in our template, the way we format our tables looks like this. It's split across 2 lines. Visually, that's fine. It looks nice. In terms of tracking, it's a little more finicky, and I'll show you why in a moment. This is an idea of how you can format your tables. This comes from APA format. There are other ways you could format your table captions, and I'll show you one right now. But I'll show you how to do both so you can see how to do it. But you'll see why it's a little bit tricky, or a little bit, there's one extra step essentially. Let me show you what I mean. So for instance, let's say you want to format just like you saw. Well, okay, you need to space down and now type, the table caption, however you're going to, whether you use sentence case or title case capitalization style, that's a choice. And as long as you're consistent, it's fine. But let's say you want to do it that way. Now in our style, we had it inverted. So the table number is not italicized, but the table caption is. Again, that comes from APA style. Now, if you go up to the list of tables and you update the table, The one problem you're going to see is it did add the table number, but it did not add the caption. And the reason it didn't add the caption is because it's on another line. It doesn't realize that the second line, in my mind, is also part of the caption. So there are two options. One is, this is perfectly acceptable. It's fine with us if you format your table captions just like your figure captions, with the difference being that they're above the table. That's fine. So you can do it just like this. So if you now do it just like this, it's on one line. Now, if you update the table, the list of tables, it'll show up. So that's fine. That's an easy way to fix it. You could just do all of your table captions on one line, format them just like the figure captions, but on the same line. If, however, you do want to do the two-line option, the best way to do it, and this applies in a couple spots as well, instead of just pushing enter or return, again, the default, this is the default, and maybe different in different versions, but the default is if you push shift and then enter, shift and then enter, hold shift down and then push enter. It'll still push it to the next line, but what it's actually doing is it's what's called a, what do they call it? I think they call it a line break. So it's actually considering it to be part of the same line, but split. So now if you update your list of tables, it will consider it to be part of the caption, even though it's on a different line. So again, the point is, you can keep it on one line if you want, that's fine, as long as you're consistent. Or if you do want to split it and you have to do it manually, you would have to do shift and then enter to split to the next line. And then of course, if you need to adjust the italics, you can do that however your style is going to work, okay? So that's that as far as table captions. Now, one question that comes up, and a few people have asked this, so I'll certainly address this quickly right now. If you have a table that splits across two pages like this, like here's a, it's kind of hard to visualize it because this doesn't have any content, but let me put some content in it so you can see it. But let's say, okay, you have a table. Oh, well, the way the text is being laid out, it kind of just doesn't fit. It's going to split across two pages of the document. Two options. One is if it's really close to the bottom of the page like this, like let's say there's, there's one line, it is perfectly acceptable to simply move the table to the top of the next page if there was just a small amount of space left on the previous page. So again, logistically, if it just makes sense to push it to the next page, whether it's a figure or a table, do that. If, however, let's say it's a really long table and it's not appropriate to just push the whole thing, you want to split it into two. We've showed an example of this in our template, but I want you to see how to do it really quickly right now. So for example, this isn't very visually appealing, but it'll show you how to do it. You could split this into two separate tables. Now, technically, they're going to look like one continuous table, and you could actually put a table caption that indicates it's a continuation onto the second page. The simple thing to do is this. You simply, there are a couple ways to do it. I think this one will work, so I'm going to try this one. I think you just highlight. You probably don't even have to highlight the whole thing, but I'm going to do the whole thing just to be safe. Highlight everything you want to split. And under the table options, again, it might look slightly different, but it's the same concept. Somewhere there's a table option that's going to say split table. If you split the table, let's see if it did it. Yeah, it did it. It wasn't visually interesting, but it did it. So what you can see is this is now a separate table, right? So it came from one table and now it's split into two. So again, all I did was I was on the table, I highlighted where I want the split, everything after the split. I went to layout, table layout, split table, and now it's split it into two. Now, if I wanted to, I could add a second caption right here, and I could say table, whatever it is, table one, and I could do the abbreviation continuing. Now, one point is, now visually there's no break, so the reader would be going through, they'd see table one, this is a continuation of table one, great, and they understand it. If you do that, you do not need to have the table caption show up in the list of tables, if that makes sense. Like you don't have to have the continuation also appear in the list of tables. So what you would want to do is you might actually be careful not to copy it from the previous one and just type in table one continue, because then Word is not actually tracking this, but but your reader can understand what it means, if that makes sense. So again, all you have to do is split the table and type this text in. Now you want to be careful. Don't do this. Don't split it and add this until everything else is formatted correctly, because otherwise, now it turns out maybe you need to add something up here, and now you have an issue because your split doesn't actually fall in the correct spot anymore. So wait till you've done everything else before you make those kind of decisions like splitting something or anything else. Okay. So that again basically summarizes the table caption options. And just to give you a kind of a sense of the timing here, yeah, we're running up on where I was expecting to end. I will be happy to continue on and show some more examples. I'll show some what I would call kind of more advanced things, and any questions anyone else has, I'll continue to answer those. But I certainly understand if you need to kind of leave by around 5, that's fine. I will continue to proceed as needed, and I will share the recording once that's ready as well. Just again, to give you a heads up. Now, one important question that's come up, and this relates to tables and figures. Somebody asked, what if you want to do chapter-based numbering? And some people will prefer this. So here what you've seen is examples of sequential figure numbering. So for instance, if you look at the list of figures, they proceed sequentially through the entire document. So it doesn't matter what chapter it's in, it's just the next number based on the previous figure. So figure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through the entire document. That is one option, sequential numbering through the entire document. The other option is chapter-based figure or table numbering. Now, I can show you the hard way to do it. I'm not going to show you that right now, but I'm saying for those who want to see it, I can show you the hard way, the long way to do it. However, based on what I've seen and based on what students have told me over the years, we've decided to do it this way. If you go back to our resources page and you look at where we have the template, you'll notice that I've added an alternative version of the template. So the version I've showed you so far is just the main version, we'll call it. The alternative version is the same as the one I've shown you in every single way, except it is it's kind of preset for chapter-based numbering. Now you might say, why does it need to be a different version? It's kind of hard to explain. I'd have to show you, and it's kind of too complicated to be worth anybody's time for the most part. The point is, if you know at the outset you want to do chapter-based figure numbering. So just to explain what it means, I'll show you in a minute, but it would look like this. It'd be like you'd have figure 1.1. If it's within chapter 1, it'd be 1.1, 1.2. And then if it's now chapter 2, you would change it to 2.1, 2.2, et cetera. So in other words, in each chapter, it tells you which chapter you're in and all the figures only within that chapter, and that resets for the next chapter is kind of the gist of it. If you know at the outset you want to use that style, please just go ahead and use this alternative version right at the outset. It'll be much easier that way. I can, if need be, I can even show you how to take your current version to that version or vice versa. That's all fine, and I can do that, but for the simplest purposes, I just decided I'm gonna make 2 versions because people just pick the one they want and go with that. So if you know you want chapter-based numbering, just go ahead and download the chapter-based version. Again, everything else is the same, so that's the only difference. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up the chapter-based version to show you what this would look like. Again, everything else is the same, all the other content, all the other details apply. Even the way you go to create the table caption or figure caption is the same. Go to references, go to insert caption. Now pick the type. So again, it'll be figure in this case. Now, what you would then do is you look at numbering. And what you want to make sure of is that it includes the chapter number. That's really it. And here's something, now that you understand styles, this will be helpful because basically what it's telling you here is it's going to include a chapter number, and the way Word knows if it's a new chapter is based on the heading 1 style. So the template with the chapter-based numbering is already set up to include chapters this way. And so if you choose this, include chapter number, it'll work correctly. And you can then choose, so you can see, you can choose what you want to use. You can do 1.1 or you can do 1-1. That's fine as long as you're consistent, whatever you choose. Click OK, click OK. So now you can see it's going to use chapter-based numbering instead of sequential numbering for the figures. okay? So that's really it. So again, I would just say the simple answer is use the chapter-based numbering version and then just proceed like I just showed you. Insert a caption wherever you need it. Go to numbering, make sure you're, including a chapter number, et cetera, et cetera. That's that, okay? So that's really it. That's the only difference between these two templates. I just found it's kind of hard to explain. I can show people who are really interested in how these advanced features of Word, but the gist of it is, it was too confusing for students who didn't need it. But then it was also hard for students who did need this feature to bring it in. So I just have two different versions that you can use. So again, use the version that's appropriate to you. Now, a couple other small things I can show you quickly, and then I'd be happy to take any other questions in the chat box as we wrap up here. And of course, after the session, if you think of something later, you can always email me. You can just email me with a specific question about format. Now, what I will say is many of your questions have already been answered, and we have video guides that can show you the answer in kind of a format like what I'm doing right now, kind of walking you through it. But I'm always happy to answer a question if it's something I can help with. But it's easiest to just email me if you do have a question following up. So again, I just make that caveat. A couple other things I can show you though within the space of this session. I've seen many students, somebody just asked a question, which is a good one. They said, should all figures and tables be centered? I would say yes. I know the one I did here, I didn't, for instance, just some quick as an example, but especially for figures, it's probably visually more appealing if they're always centered. Now, they wouldn't look like this. It usually is not just a small, narrow image. Depending on what it is, you can decide what the best appearance is, but usually it's probably best to center all of them. Now, when it comes to tables, I mean, again, I would say it depends, but it's probably a good idea to center all of them. It stands out more visually. It's not required. If all of them are left aligned, that would probably be fine too. I still think most figures would look better centered, so it's probably better to do figure centered. And in that case, you probably want to do table centered as well. So it's not a requirement, but again, aesthetically, it probably would just look a little cleaner. So I would say yes, probably go for centering them. I just thought of something that I hadn't mentioned before. I'm sorry. And somebody said, this goes to my point, do the figures and tables have to be the width of the margin? So in other words, do the figures have to go fully to the margin? No. So for example, if you have a figure, which might be an image or might be a visual of some kind, it very well may not fit appropriately. In other words, it might be that this is an image that needs to stand on its own. That's fine. There's no absolute requirement on that. And similarly with tables, it does not have to. You can use your judgment. Like for instance, if it just visually looks more, it's more comprehensible, I guess you could say, with smaller size. I just messed that up because it's its own. It's its own thing. But in any case, my point being, no, it wouldn't have to go fully to the margins. It depends on how many, how many columns you have, how much content is in each column or each row. That's a decision you can make based on the appearance and aesthetics. And again, that's a case, again, where consistency is more important. It's not really important to us as long as it makes sense and it's legible. So again, the main touchstone would be if somebody came to your document and started reading it and they're not you, could they read it and understand what you did and it just visually is appealing and comprehensible? That's the standard. Another point I just thought of that I want to mention was it has to do with justified text. The template as it currently stands does not use justified text. And by the way, justified text looks like this. This is what I'm talking about. Let me move this. If you do justified text, it fully brings the text from the left margin to the right margin. And so it spaces things out differently so that it fits fully the margins. You're not required to use it, but you're certainly not forbidden to use it either. I mean, you can use it as long as you're consistent. So it is a problem if half of the document is justified text, half of the paragraphs, and then the rest are not. That's visually, unappealing and less professional looking. So we would definitely want you to update that. But you can either justify all paragraphs or leave them unjustified. Either way is fine. Do be careful if you just do, you could do Control A to highlight everything. If you justify the entire document, there might be some things that don't look right, so you might have to double check that. It might be safer to do it kind of page by page and then just kind of, you know, drag through the pages as you go through each chapter. Most sections, it should be fine if you just go the whole section and then just do justify. It should just do it automatically. Yeah, but see here, it changed the heading, so now you want to go back and make sure the heading is correctly centered, etc. So there's some little finicky things you might have to check when it comes to justified text. Let me think. Yeah, and if you do justified text, make sure you do it for the subsections here as well. Okay, so that's that. Another kind of moderate to advanced, oh, well, I'm sorry, one other main question people always ask, and I'll get to one more moderate advanced, and I'll kind of wrap up unless people have further follow-up questions. Somebody just asked, do you have to justify the appendices? Well, again, just to be clear, any just text, I would say any paragraph text, if you're justifying anything, I would justify everything that's paragraph text, if possible. If, however, in the appendix, for instance, you have an image, like which is, it's a different document, but you brought it in as an image. I mean, you don't have to change it. I guess what I'm saying is if it's from a different document and you have a scan of it or an image of the other document, you don't have to try to go back and have that other document justified. So within reason, yes, if the text is justified, justify all body paragraphs. And similarly, like you wouldn't have to justify the references section because it might not look as good. It depends. That's again a choice. So we wouldn't be as stringent about that, but we would say if the body paragraphs are justified, make sure all body paragraphs are justified. That's certainly the minimum as far as that's concerned. One other thing people ask me about is page numbers. The simplest thing by far is to use the template because the template has the pagination correct. That's the simple answer. Use the template because the template is already correct. If, however, you are using the template and you come across a problem, or if for whatever other reason you need to adjust something, if you go to the heading options, you can also do it by insert page number. That's how you bring up the page option, the page number options. But if you need to insert page numbers, you can also go to insert, or you can double click on the heading. Within the heading, similarly, there's an option. So there's a lot of places to find it, but there's insert page numbers. They do need to be in the top right. Once you inserted page numbers, you can right click on the page number in the heading options and go to format page numbers. If you go to format page numbers, you can change them from Roman numeral to standard numeral and vice versa. That's how we have both Roman numeral and standard numeral in the document. Now, it gets a little complicated when it comes to sections, and that's what this is referring to here, previous section. So the issue is the only way to change from, say, Roman numerals to standard numerals is to have a section break. Now, you can do this yourself, but we already, as I said, we have it built into the template, so start by using the template to solve most problems. But if you needed to, let's say, I'm just going to give an imaginary situation, but it'll show you how this works. If you need to now switch to Roman numerals or switch to a different kind of numerals at some point in the document, you first need to create what's called the section break. And generally that's under, I believe it's layout, and then they have breaks. Layout and breaks. So what you do first, you put your cursor, you basically put your cursor at the end of the previous page. So let's say we want the section break to start right here. So I put my cursor at the end of the previous page, go to layout, breaks. You'll see there are different types of break. And then they have a section break that starts on the next page. That's what I want to do. That's the easiest way to do it. And for most purposes, that's the only way I would recommend. So breaks, next page, section break. If I do this, you can see it already did something, but now this new page is a new section. A new section can have a new heading style. It could have other formatting differences than the previous section. So if I now double click on the heading, you can actually see it shows you the section you're in. It says section 3 up here and then section 4 here. Since we're in section 4, I could reformat these page numbers I could change them. I could do all kinds of things. I could make them into letters, whatever I might do. I'm going to do letters just to show you what I mean. So now the previous section is still numbered as it was, but this section is now lettering, and it starts with A and it continues thereafter. Okay, so that's the gist of it. That's how you create different types of numbering within a document. But and I see there's another question. I'll come to that one in a moment because I'm trying to understand what that means and thinking about it. Something else you can do now that I showed you section breaks. Again, all I did was I went to the end of the previous page before I want to break. I put the cursor there, that is. I put layout, and then I put breaks, section break. Next page. Another thing you can do once you have a section break is you can change to a landscape format. Now this can be useful if you have a really oversized table or figure. Those are the common cases where it comes up, and it would be more appropriate on a landscape page. Now you can do that. If you have a different section, you can go to layout, orientation, landscape. And you can see the previous pages are in standard portrait style, but this is now in landscape. Now what it will do, I think by default, it'll make the entire section into landscape, okay? So if you only want one page to be landscape, you'd have to then create another section break. So now these are two separate sections, and now this can be changed back to portrait. And you'll see what I mean now. So in other words, just this page, which is its own section, is a landscape page or would have this separate numbering. Again, I can go back and change the numbering now, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you do a section break, you can change the numbering, or you can change the format in terms of landscape versus portrait page. So that's another question that does come up sometimes. I want to show you an example of that. Now somebody's asking a question about separating a dissertation into two parts. I might have to follow up with you individually, and I'll mark down your name. I have it here, just to understand what you mean. Because if you're saying, I mean, the chapter layout can differ, if that makes sense. Like, you could have a slightly different chapter style if it's appropriate and if the committee approves, but you would not, I mean, I don't know what else it would mean by two different sections of a dissertation. I mean, you could have a different style, but it's still one cohesive dissertation. But again, we can follow up later and talk through that if you have a specific question about a different layout for a document. But again, the standard options would be you'd either have kind of a standard 5 chapter sections, chapter 1, introduction, literature review methodology, or you might have different chapters, each of which represents a different sub experiment or something like that. That could work in some cases if it's considered appropriate by the committee. Sorry, 1 second, I said to fix something on my phone. So that's that as far as that. Now somebody's asking about another question about formatting. We will kind of wrap up now, but I'll be happy to take other questions kind of continuing into email and so on going forward. Somebody's asking about formatting. The description of a section comes into the, is not working. I'm trying to think. Okay, so you're saying something like, I'm trying to see an example. It's something like, it didn't work to, like, here, I think they're saying this. They have a section, and it's, let's say it looks like this, and then they update the table of contents. Uh-oh, something came up and it shouldn't be there. But when they go to the text, they can't figure out how to undo this. They can't get this off of this head, the heading type. So for instance, they might try to click like normal, but it doesn't work. Like mine is working, but it doesn't work. I have seen that before. It might be a different version of Word has that problem or something, or it's a different mechanism. I'm not positive. The simplest thing I would do, let me think, there are a couple of options. I mean, okay, worst case scenario, you delete that paragraph and you retype it, like, or you copy it into a different document and then you type it out. So you know that it's not formatted wrong. Then you go back and you very carefully just highlight the heading and then do the style. So that's the worst case. Another one that might work, it might be similar but simpler. You might be able to just copy, cut it and paste it, and it might remove the format. So if you cut it, like on mine, I'm using Control X as a default. I'm using Windows, obviously. Let's see. If you do, like, if you have options, like if you can paste it, if you have paste options, you can paste the text only. See, it might carry, I was wondering if it would carry the format. That's what I was wondering. Well, there are other ways to do it as well. Again, I might have to play around with it and give you some more suggestions on that, but the real, if you're really stuck, you can't get it off of this form. I would try this too. Try highlighting the entire paragraph. See if you can change the entire paragraph, everything included, back to normal. Or, this is where I can't recall off the top of my head. There's some mechanism somewhere where you can just remove all formatting. I can't think of it off the top of my head. So I'm not gonna leave it now. Or you could, yeah, I can't remember. You can look it up on Google as well. Is there a way, how do you just strip all formatting or strip all styles? There's some keyword or some button you can click to do that. So if this doesn't work, if you can't click normal, it doesn't revert back to normal. If that works, you're done, you're good. Now just go back and recreate heading 3. Again, the worst case is you have to delete part of that paragraph and then retype it, or paste it into a different document in plain text, then paste it back in here in plain text. Those are basically the only suggestions I can come up with off the top of my head. I'd have to kind of see your version of Word and we'd have to test some options. Normally, one of those will work. So that's really that. So again, I hope this has been very useful. I know I went a little over time, even to what I was expecting, but I did want to show you some of the real core functions of the template so you kind of see them in action. There are always additional questions that come up. It might be some small thing that doesn't seem to work the way you expected, or something that came up that you hadn't thought of during this session. I want to point out one other resource before I leave you today. On our thesis dissertation page, it's kind of buried. There are a couple places you can find it, but it might be a little more hidden than I want it to be. I'll probably update this soon. At the top, if you look at the left column, if you're on a main desktop version, there are different subsections under thesis and dissertation. One of them is called formatting guidelines. That'll get you there. Or if you scroll down under resources, under additional writing resources, there's one that says formatting help. Same link as the one I just showed you up above. If you go there, you'll find that there are kind of short video guides for each of these different issues. So there's a short video guide that just talks about page numbers, that just talks about the preliminary pages and issues that come up. So basically what I'm saying is if you have a problem with one of these types of issue, this will show you in more detail how to do it, including I do go through in more detail how to create the chapter-based numbering from scratch, so to speak. So again, I did recommend if you want to do chapter-based numbering, just use the appropriate template and then you're good. But if you want to do it from scratch yourself, I believe this will really walk you through how to do it. There are also things that, again, I don't really show you normally because if you do it right, you shouldn't need to use them. But like if I were to go to the table of contents, these lines with ... that go across, these are called leader lines. And the reason leader lines are useful is that obviously everything's messed up here because I changed, for example, I changed it to lettering. But what's useful about leader lines is if you type, it automatically shrinks the leader line, and the leader line always will end at a certain endpoint. So here it goes right up to the margin. Now you can create your own leader lines manually, and you could create your own table of contents from scratch that way. And so the video guide here shows you how to create leader lines. You might find that useful just for your own interest anyways. It's an interesting skill or whatever. But again, if you go to the formatting guidelines subpage, it does have these video guides. So some of the things I showed you here, you can kind of refresh yourself with these video guides, or later, as I said, you'll be able to rewatch this video this session that we're in right now. With that, I do want to leave us off. And I know I've overloaded you with content. Unfortunately and fortunately, we have a lot of resources for you. So that's fortunate. Unfortunately, yes, there are a lot of pieces to the process. So you do have to think about a lot of things. You have to think about the deadlines, you have to think about the forms, you have to think about the format, and you have to plan accordingly. So the best approach is always to start early, start as early as possible. Just start working away at, chipping away at it, because the formatting stuff, it's really not difficult. Once you start to learn how to do the format, it's just kind of, you know, it's just work. It just takes a little time and then you've got it done. The main thing we want you to focus on, obviously, is the quality of your research, spending your time, you know, getting the kinds of experiments done, the kinds of research done that really move your field forward. That's obviously going to be the focal point, and it should be. But you do have to also, as you get to those later points, you do have to think about what are these deadlines? How do they work? What exactly needs to be done by each deadline? What do I need to do to get this thing formatted? So that when it comes to it, I mean, really, here's my thought. The ideal process is you submit it to us. There are minimal, if any, changes to be made to the formatting because you've already done all the things we've talked about today. It's just a smooth process. So once it gets to November, for example, for a fall semester, once it gets to November, it's just those final touches to kind of, you know, maybe make a couple small changes, finalize the document, get your signature page, and you've wrapped up the dissertation or the thesis. Because you really do not want to be in late November and there's still issues, there's still some kind of problem, et cetera, et cetera. So again, start early as you can, be proactive, not reactive, work with your advisor, work with us as needed to get help with these things. Okay, so thank you very much for participating. I hope this was very helpful. I hope everything I said made sense. I hope you know where to go to get the resources you need. And I look forward to working with you on your documents once you're in the position to submit them. If there are any other questions, please follow up with me by email. That's usually the easiest way because I can kind of send you a text response very quickly by email, or I can direct you to where to find the resource you need. Thanks again. And I do intend to have other sessions. For those who are not graduating this semester, I'll certainly have more of these for the submission, but I'll also try to have other workshops as well as webinars that touch on other aspects of writing as well. So please be on the lookout for those as well. Thanks again, and hope you have a great evening. Take care.